Welcome to the inaugural Live Free or Die Alliance web event. I'm Stephen Merrill. I'm the moderator of this event with Governor John Lynch. This event is a modern twist on a long tradition in the state of independent thinking and civic responsibility. If you don't know about the Live Free or Die Alliance, let me give you a couple of its tenets or principles. It's a forum for accurately balanced information on any subject. Any subject that you as a citizen are interested in, the Alliance will be interested in. It takes no policy positions. It endorses no candidates. But it does encourage responsible citizenship through participation. And there's no state where that's better than the participatory democracy of New Hampshire. And that's why the Live Free or Die Alliance means a great deal to the people who participate. The kind of events that they do is the kind that you're seeing here today, where the governor of the state has agreed to come in and answer questions that you have put forth. You are participating in an historic event. This has not been done before. Engaged citizenship is what makes our state great. The willingness of the governor to come here and deal with issues that you propose makes this state great. I was the first governor ever to graduate from the University of New Hampshire. I'm very proud to introduce the second governor to graduate from the University of New Hampshire. Governor John Lynch, welcome, and we'll look forward to the questions.
Thank you, Steve.
The first question I have is on a topic that we have been reading about. It has to do with the tax on LLCs, limited liability corporations. Let's take a moment and talk about it. First, John, what is being taxed, and what is the state doing with that tax revenue?
Well, thank you for the question. It really is an effort to close a loophole in the existing tax laws. Interest and dividends tax was introduced back in 1923. LLCs weren't around at that time in 1923. In fact, LLCs didn't begin here in New Hampshire until 1993. Now, right now, given the current loophole that exists, LLCs are taxed differently than corporations. So, for example, a convenience store that is incorporated would be taxed differently than a large law firm that makes its distributions directly to its partners. So this is to level the playing field, that regardless of how people choose to set up their governance structure, whether to incorporate as a corporation or as an LLC, they'll be subject to the same tax on distributions. Another example, if we have two convenience stores that are across the street from each other, one is set up as a corporation, the other is set up as an LLC. Right now, the individuals who get distributions from the corporation are taxed at a 5% rate for interest and dividends, but the LLC partners are not. So this closes that loophole that has been in place since 1993, and I think it's the right thing to do.
There's been some discussion about the location of hearings that are going to be held. I think there are going to be 3 more hearings, but I could be wrong on that. There are going to be several more hearings. Someone called my answering machine and left the following message. The hearings are going to be held in the northern part of the state, and this person suggested, although they live in the north, that there are more LLCs in Nashua and Exeter and along that corridor, and he wondered why, Governor, we aren't holding the hearings down there. Any reason for that?
Well, first of all, these are hearings really so the commissioner has the opportunity to promulgate rules and regulations that he considers to be very, very fair. And I think the best way for any individual to find out about what's going on is just to call the commissioner, Kevin Clarity, and provide him some feedback if they would like to do that in terms of suggestions that they might have for how to go forward with the LLCs. Again, I want to stress that I really do believe this is closing a loophole in existing law. This is try to level the playing field between corporations and LLCs and subject them to the same tax on the distribution to their investors.
Governor, the people who say this tax is hitting small businesses at a time when the economy is down and they don't need this tax, what's your response?
The response is that they'll also be looking at this concept called reasonable compensation, which was actually put in place in 1970 with the creation of the business profits tax and has been around for a long time. So business people will still be able to pay themselves reasonable compensation. The other thing is that there are Although LLCs, Steve, were introduced in 1993, there are now over 40,000 LLCs. And the vast, vast majority of them will not be affected by the closure of this loophole.
And why is that? They just don't generate enough revenue to...
Because they're taking compensation that's already reasonable.
Okay. Obviously, taxation, spending, the economy, they're drivers during this term of yours in particular. What are you doing, and what would you like to tell those that are watching this web event you are doing to help Granite Staters find the jobs that they need and get back into the job market?
It's a very good question. You know, we are facing arguably the most difficult economic times since the 1940s. And as you know, when revenues are down, you have to cut spending, which is what we've done in state government. In fact, it's interesting compared to the private sector, and I'm sure there are private sector people watching this webcast. In the private sector, when revenues decline, and we're facing revenues now that are close to where they were in 2004, in the private sector, when revenues decline, variable costs go down. In the public sector, when revenues decline, variable costs go up, driven by higher caseload increases in health and human services. 3 years ago, along with Commissioner George Bald, I went around a series of job cabinet meetings and talked with business people about how we could work with them to create jobs. And it's really interesting what I heard, because it's also relevant today. Business people told me 3 years ago, for the most part, they had customers for their businesses. And as you know, getting customers is oftentimes the hardest part about running a business. True for many businesses. They have the products to meet the needs of the customers, but they needed the workers with the skills and talents and qualifications necessary that for them could fill those jobs, drive revenues, make more money, and ultimately create more jobs and help with economic development. So in response to that, we put in a number of initiatives that are still there today. We created a research and development tax credit, which allows us to attract companies which depend on research and development for their competitive advantage. These are companies which manufacture products with a high value-added component to them. These companies tend to be more profitable. The products would be less likely to be manufactured overseas. The companies make more money, create more jobs. We reinstated job training, and I'm still hearing that from business people today about the need for help with job training. And because of reinstating job training, we've been able to train over 4,000 workers, keeping those jobs right here in New Hampshire. Business people told me 3 years ago, and they're still talking to me today, about the high cost of health care for them, that they're seeing their health insurance costs continue to go up. They can't raise prices enough, or don't want to raise prices enough, to protect their margins that would allow them to stay profitable and create still more jobs. They're being forced into a position of reducing coverage for their employees, in some cases eliminating coverage for their employees. So we came out with New Hampshire Health First, which is an insurance program geared for small businesses. It focuses on prevention and wellness. It focuses on making sure workers have a medical home, better management of chronic disease, and for comparable coverage in the marketplace, business people would pay 15 to 20% less than that comparable coverage. So we're actually doing a lot. To help businesses, there's really only two ways, and being in the private sector, I understand this, that you can help businesses make more money. You help them with their cost structure, or you help them with their revenue growth. And that's what we're trying to do now, and that's what we tried to do 3 years ago.
It always struck me that the discussion of New Hampshire, particularly when it comes to taxes and jobs and the economy, was based on the term taxes. Whereas when I became governor, I found out it had an awful lot more to do with spending than it did to do with taxes. That it was as though taxes were the symptom, but spending was the disease, and if you can't control spending, you don't have any choice. We'll take California. If you continue to spend, you have to keep raising taxes, and then if the revenue drops down, you have to keep raising them again, so you get into a spiral, and you must have had to fight that in order to stop that from happening here.
Absolutely. In fact, our general education fund spending is less than it was in the previous biennium. We have fewer state employees working than we had a number of years ago. And we've done some major things in state government in order to address spending. It was clear to me, Steve, that we just couldn't, as we were approaching the budget, do a 15% across the board cut, as some may have proposed. You can't do it because of the following. 45% of our general and education funds are direct aid to cities and towns. So some who have proposed cutting across the board by 15% also say, by the way, don't touch aid to cities and towns. You may have experienced this in your difficult economic times when you were governor. So that's 45% of the budget. 30% of the budget is health and human services. And I already talked about the fact that caseloads are increasing as unemployment has gone up by a considerable amount, in some cases 10 to 15%. So that's another 30% of the budget. 4% of the budget is debt service, and you can't cut debt service. 4% is spending by the judicial system. You have another 4% by corrections, and within the corrections budget, we actually cut costs there compared to the prior year, although we see the number of inmates going up. So when it comes down to it, you know, it's difficult when 90% of the budget is basically off limits to cut it. But we made some major structural changes. We closed the Laconia Correctional Facility that allowed us to reduce costs. We closed a number of courts. We're looking at health and human services and how we distribute our funds through the nonprofit organizations. We've centralized purchasing in state government. I want to, and I'm sure again you dealt with issues like this when you were governor, I want technology to do for state government, and this has to do with controlling spending. I want technology to do for state government what it has done for so many other businesses. Technology should be able to improve service, improve quality, and stabilize costs. A good example is the fact that now, will come February, citizens will be able to renew their driver's licenses online, which it's really good for the citizens to be able to do that. So instead of blocking out a day, bringing the kids to a Department of Motor Vehicles substation, they can take 10 minutes on a Sunday morning and renew their driver's licenses. So I want to continue to put technology in state government.
And that's a very, very good point, because if they see things in the private sector that are innovative and then they go to state government and they find it anachronistic or medieval, they get a very bad sense. So that's a very good idea. I won't bore you with what I think about restrictions in governors' spending, but I think they are a very bad idea. I think governors ought to be given as much flexibility as possible to balance budget. And everybody says, yes, you can do that, but you just can't touch the part that I like.
Right.
So everybody's willing to have other people's money spent, but not their own.
And again, I'm sure you experienced this after I gave my budget address and said, you know, we had to make some tough decisions, which is what we did do. So many people would come in my office and they'd say, Governor, terrific speech, great budget, except the part that applies to me.
Yeah.
Again, I'm sure you experienced
Same
that
thing.
yourself, given the tough times you were in. And it doesn't work that way.
That's right. You'll never balance a budget if you give everybody what they want. We have an interesting question. Can you tell us of any bills that you have vetoed in the last year?
You know, I can talk about bills that I vetoed since I've been governor, but the one I vetoed this last time was the medical marijuana bill. And, you know, I am very empathetic and sympathetic to those individuals who might benefit from the use of marijuana to treat their particular conditions or disease or symptoms. But I was also concerned, and I remain concerned, about the distribution of marijuana in the state. And, you know, if for example, it were able to be confined within hospitals, I would be more open to that than allowing the possibility of it being open to unlimited distribution. I'm very concerned about that. As you know, New Hampshire was recently ranked the safest state in the country. And we should be pretty proud of that, and we also should be very protective of what we have in place. And I was concerned about that. Certainly law enforcement almost unanimously opposed that bill, yeah. So I ended up vetoing it.
Do you think they're working in the legislature now to try to address the changes that you raised, and they'll try to come back with a new bill and see if you'll sign that one?
Well, they may. You know, they may be working on it, but if it comes back in basically the same format with the same concerns that I have, I won't let it go forward.
Any bills that you have signed this year that you're particularly proud of? Any that you say, this will make a difference in New Hampshire going forward?
I can tell you a bill that I'm very proud of, having signed into law, and it's something that I initiated, was raising the compulsory attendance age here in New Hampshire. Now, this is one didn't sign this year, but signed in a previous term, raising the compulsory attendance age for high school students from 16 to 18. Prior to that, kids could drop out of school at age 16, which is a result of a law that was passed back in 1903. And back then, kids could drop out of school and get jobs working in the mills or the farms. New Hampshire was primarily an agrarian community. But kids who drop out of school today at age 16 can't get jobs. And they end up getting into trouble, having social problems. 80% of the prisoners in this country are high school dropouts. So I'm very proud of the fact that we're encouraging more of our kids to stay in school. As a state, we have a goal for 2012 to have 0 dropouts. We also know that education drives jobs. So this is more than just giving our kids the opportunity that they should have to have a fulfilling life. It's also about economic development.
Do we know if it's working yet, Governor?
Well, it's only within the last couple of years, but we do see the dropout rate coming down pretty dramatically.
Good. Well, we're going back to LLCs for a moment. Do you foresee the bill forcing increases in unemployment or businesses being forced to close?
No, I don't.
You just simply don't think that the number of businesses and the revenue that they generate will be affected by the bill in that way?
No, I don't. I think what it will do is close a loophole, as I said. It won't affect the vast majority of LLCs. So with the 40,000 LLCs, the vast majority will not be impacted by this. It allows for reasonable compensation, which is a concept that has been in place in New Hampshire since 1970 with the creation of the business profits tax. So I don't see any dampening of economic development.
Question that says, how do you plan to fund the budget based on health care reform, and how will that affect small business?
Well, I'm not sure what health care reform they're
I wondered if it meant
to.
the federal health care reform.
You know, and it could be, and we don't know what the final piece of legislation is going to look like. I have been concerned about the cost of health care reform, and there have been, as you know, different estimates by various organizations as whether it's going to increase costs or lower costs. I'm concerned about the cost, and I'm also concerned that, at least with some of the bills that had been proposed, there would be the shifting of costs to the states.
That's right.
And, you know, we don't have the money. So I think we all agree, many people agree, that we do need health care reform. I think right now it's very inefficient. It's very expensive in New Hampshire, by the way. It's about 18% of our gross state product. It costs about $8,000 per capita. So although our quality is high, our costs are high. But I am very concerned about any proposal in Washington that would shift costs onto the states.
What would you say, Governor, to someone who said, it seems to me that while we have problems in health care that need to be addressed, what is happening in Washington seems to be a whole-scale tackling of this huge subject with a federal plan and a federal bureaucracy rather than dealing with the touch points, the pressure points of the system that we all agree need to be addressed?
Well, as I said, I do think most people agree that we need to have health care reform. It's administered. It's very, very expensive. It's been shown that the outcomes don't differ markedly compared to other countries. So we do need health care reform. I'm worried about the cost. I'm worried about the cost shifting. I do think we need to try to find a way, which I think this plan does do, of making health care more accessible and more affordable to more of our citizens.
Okay. From health care, we're going to move on to our state parks. One of New Hampshire's greatest assets is its state park system. And yet New Hampshire is the only park system that is self-funded. Do you support general funding for our state park system?
I provided in my capital budget funding for the state park system, which is the first time capital dollars had been appropriated for the state parks in many, many years. I think the state parks need to continue to look for creative ways that they can fund themselves. I think what they're currently doing is segmenting the state parks, so not all of them are the same. There are some that are frequented more often than others, some which are best left in a more rustic state. So they have a plan in place now which I think needs to be thoroughly discussed. But for now, anyway, I think they should continue finding creative ways to fund their own state park system.
You get a chance to go out into those state parks at all anymore?
Well, I haven't for a while, but I spent a lot of time, my wife and my family, in the state parks, particularly Lafayette Park, which I just really love that part of New Hampshire.
Yeah. I climb Packmanadnock all the time. I'm embarrassed to tell you that when I was governor, I did ski ads where I had a ski parka on, and my suit pants and shoes, and after they would shoot the ad with me holding the poles, I'd get my suit back on and go back to Concord and go back to work. I don't know why I didn't ski in the afternoon. I must have thought it was so important for me to get back there, but if I had to do it over again, I don't think I would do it that way.
No, I actually did an ad at Cannon to promote Cannon Mountain, and it was one of the coldest days of the year. And we ended up skiing for a while afterwards.
Good.
But the park system and our ski areas are real jewels in New Hampshire. Our state parks certainly are. And I think it's really important that we manage them in a way that future generations will also be able to enjoy them.
And if you look at people who have moved to New Hampshire, you find that, number one, among the New England states, more people have moved here than almost any other state. And they do it because they go to camp here, they go to college here, they go to our state park systems. They like what they see. They want to live in this community, and it's great. Let's go to one that's a tough one that I always fought. This is a budget question. These are very difficult economic times, Governor. Why don't you just cut the budget 15% across the board?
Well, I think I addressed that earlier, and I'm not going to restate what I addressed, except again to say that 45% of the budget is direct aid to cities and towns. And the very people that want us to cut it by 15% also say, by the way, don't touch aid to cities and towns because that will result in downshifting those costs, which have to be picked up at the local level, driving up local property taxes. Health and Human Services. By the way, we are looking, and I'll talk about this for a minute, 30% of the budget, as I said, is Health and Human Services. We are looking at how they distribute their dollars. As I'm sure you know, Health and Human Services they don't directly help citizens for the most part of clients. They contract out with nonprofit organizations which do that. They contract out with 4,000 different nonprofit organizations or individuals. 4,000. And I think it's too many. So I've been working with the commissioner examining how we can really sort of segment the market and figure out a better way to rationalize the system. Because every one of these nonprofit organizations, as you know, and they're all well-intended and they all do good work, but each one has administrative costs. They have an executive director, board of directors, and I think we could rationalize the system. Now, it's politically difficult because every time you make a suggestion that you consolidate or rationalize the system, you know, they'll have on their board politically powerful people like yourself who will start screaming and saying, well, don't touch my organization, right? Using you as an example. I'm sure that would not be the case. But we need to rationalize that system. Now, I say that not because I don't care about the people that we serve, but I'm saying it because I do care about the people we serve. If we could put more money into directly helping people as opposed to paying the administrative costs, we would be better off.
Much better.
I want Health and Human Services, I want state government to be a market leader in all that we do. And the classic definition of a market leader is you meet the needs of the customer in the most efficient way possible. And I'm striving for that efficiency at the state level.
Well, if you want a Republican phrase, when I was governor, I said cutting the budget across the board is like playing tennis without a net. Anybody can do that. You ought to find the places that grow revenue and generate revenue and help them, and you ought to cut the costs on the parts of government that don't. I have a last question for you. Why did you create a gambling commission in New Hampshire, and what do you hope to get from it, Governor?
I want a gambling commission to objectively look at the data, look at the evidence, see what's going on in other states, and come up with some very good objective analysis as to what different models of expanded gambling might look like here in New Hampshire. As governor, and I'm sure you did this as well, I want to be fiercely protective of our quality of life. You know, we have a winning strategy here in New Hampshire. We really do, and it's something that we should be proud of. In addition to the safest state in the nation, you know, we're recently ranked as the best state in the country in which to raise kids, something I think we should be proud of. We're always acknowledged as one of the most livable states, the healthiest states, best educated states. We need to be fiercely protective of our quality of life. And I want to see very compelling evidence that expanded gambling will not affect our quality of life before I'm willing to consider it.
Thank you for attending this event, and we certainly look forward to more interesting web chats in the future. You should also know that there are a number of questions on the web that were addressed to Governor John Lynch. He's going to do his best to answer them and get back to you. We're going to have further events. We've got Jeanne Shaheen coming in. United States Senator Jeanne Shaheen, who followed me as governor, is going to come in and answer and participate in an event like this. Feel free to participate with the Live Free or Die Alliance. It is a great forum. It will get answers to questions for New Hampshire citizens.